Now we have 26 attendees. So we wait.
Great. Well, I'll give it 30 seconds then, and then we'll launch. So we'll just wait for other people to join, but I imagine there'll be people joining as they go. All right. Well, I wish everyone a very good day. My name is David Simpson. I am Director of the Independent Recourse Mechanism, or the IRM, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to today's virtual event to launch the advisory note produced by the African Development Bank's IRM, which is focused on providing insights and learnings on preventing, mitigating, and responding to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, or SEAH, in bank-financed operations. Just before we start, just a few points on housekeeping issues. First, you're all on mute with your videos turned off. This is to support the quality and connection of the webinar. Be aware, however, that we will be recording this webinar to share afterwards for anyone who was not be able to join us today. But in that, your names will not be visible. The webinar is available in English and French, and to change the languages, please choose from the setting bar at the bottom of the Zoom page, which I think we're all getting familiar with at this point. Please also be advised that this webinar contains content on SEAH that some may find distressing. The chat is open. If you'd also like to share your name and organization, panelists may also be sharing links to relevant resources that are available, and we'll also try to keep an eye on it to support any tech issues that you may have. Also, if you'd like to ask any questions during the live Q&A in particular, please add them on the Q&A function throughout the webinar. And you can find that Q&A in the controls panel, again, on the same area in the bottom of your screen. At the end of the webinar, we'll share a poll for feedback on today's webinar, and we very much appreciate it if you might also complete this. So I think that's all the housekeeping aspect of it, and I can start with our webinar for this day. So maybe just a little bit of background. The African Development Bank has done quite a lot of work over the past number of years to address issues of SEAH. A lot of this work has been focused internally within the bank, and this was really resulted in quite an increase in awareness of SEAH within the bank. SEAH within operations, however, is often a tougher nut to crack. And international financial institutions, development agencies, as well as civil society actors of all stripes really continue to struggle with the best way to address SEAH within their operations or within the projects that they finance. And this was really the catalyst for our report that we did to do an inventory of some of the lessons learned and explore both the successes and the challenges, and identify emerging best practice in this area, which can contribute to what we really care in this element of making an institutional learnings, not only within the AFDB, but throughout the broader development community, so that we might then apply and implement some of these recommendations stemming from the advisory note and in our respective institutions. So SEAH is increasingly being recognized by governments, development organizations, and donor agencies alike as a critical development issue. And indeed, just last month, the US government released a set of new commitments on the prevention of sexual abuse and exploitation, which includes, among other things, as holding international organizations and other development partners to the, quote, highest standard in this area, in order to prevent and mitigate SEAH risks. So given this happy coincidence and confluence of events, I was delighted then when AFDB Executive Director, Ms. Oren Shaw, representing the US constituency, accepted our invitation to provide some introductory comments for today's proceedings. Director Shaw has a wealth of experience in international development and international financial institutions particularly. She served at the USAID from 2015 to 2020 as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the African Bureau, where she was the coordinator for President Obama's Partnership and Growth Initiative, and was also the coordinator for the Trade Africa Initiative. Prior to joining USAID, Ms. Shaw served as the Senior Advisor in the Multilateral Development Bank Office in the Department of Treasury. Director Shaw, it gives me great pleasure to turn over the floor to you today for today's introductory comments. Please go ahead.
Thank you, David. And I am pleased to be here today and to say a few opening remarks. I was very pleased that you asked me to participate in what is truly a critical and important issue. I'm pleased to be able to represent the United States and the African Development Bank's Board of Directors at this launch of a critical advisory note on preventing, mitigating, and responding to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment within the bank's operations. The bank represents the institution's regional and non-regional shareholders, the bank board, through 20 resident board seats. In our governance of the African Development Bank, we have the opportunity to work closely with the oversight, accountability, and integrity units, like the Independent Recourse Mechanism, or IRM, that ensure that the bank upholds the highest standards, as you have mentioned, and delivers bank projects in a way that mitigate risk, safeguard beneficiaries, and offer redress when needed. Preventing, mitigating, and responding to SEAH within our operations is paramount to achieving the bank's development mission. So I am pleased to convey that the AFDB board has had the opportunity to review and comment on this advisory note, and that the board has endorsed the excellent analysis and approach that has been developed by the IRM team. And we agree with the recommendations of the IRM for improving the AFDB's SEAH approach. As board members, we will continue to work with bank management for timely and complete execution of IRM's recommendations. Now, let me speak on behalf of the United States. The United States, as you indicated, takes the matter of SEAH very seriously, and we are strongly committed to all international organizations adopting best-in-class policies and practices. The United States recently issued that set of principles on protection from SEAH within international organizations. These principles are a reflection of the US commitment to engage in a clear and consistent manner on SEAH issues and to promote accountability and transparency in response to SEAH incidents. I personally am committed to this. When I was at USAID, I was one of the champions in the Africa Bureau on this issue. So it is personal as well as just the fact that it is something that the board deals with. These principles include a zero-tolerance, survivor-centered approach, adequate prevention and risk mitigation through appropriate funding and training, and the highest level of accountability and transparency. Systems-level organizational cultural change and working to empower local communities. And that's critical because if local communities don't know what our responsibilities are, it is very difficult for them to feel that they can have recourse. In our view, the recommendations in the IRM SEAH advisory note are consistent with our principles, that of the US government, and full realization of the recommendations would meaningfully improve the African Development Bank's ability to prevent, mitigate, and respond to SEAH. We appreciate, I certainly appreciate, as do we all on the board, IRM's gap analysis approach, which has revealed real weaknesses, but weaknesses that the bank, with the support of the board, is in a position to address. In more discussion of this advisory note, the board has called for the AFDB to be a leader and a proactive champion on this agenda, and has expressed our desire to have regular updates on the progress toward these goals. We will continue working to make these IRM recommendations the bank's reality. Again, thank you very much for asking me to do these opening remarks. It's been my pleasure. And I wish, and I know, this will be a very successful webinar. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Director Whiteshaw, for those very relevant comments for today's presentation. So let us turn to that presentation then today now. When we talk about sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, SEAH really is a term used to refer to abuses of a sexual nature perpetrated by those employed or funded through development assistance resource flows. That could be grants, that could be loans, that could be equity stakes. And that's what we're here today to discuss. And in particular, SEAH, which occurs in projects funded by IFIs. The fact that the IRM is launching this advisory report today is, of course, no coincidence, as it coincides with the annual 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign, which culminates in Human Rights Day in 2 days from now on December 10th, the day that we celebrate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I believe next year will celebrate 75 years. And let's be clear, SEAH is a violation of those human rights. It has the potential to destroy lives. It can result in serious and long-lasting health problems, lead to anxiety, trauma, depression. It results in further violation of rights to security, to the mobility and livelihoods of those that are being targeted. And it also breaks down community trust and can prevent populations from achieving what we all want, is that of gender equality. When perpetrated within the bank's resource flows and projects, it undermines the very values the bank supports, acting contrary to development goals and principles with very serious impacts and harms on those affected. And it also undermines AFDB's overall mission to spur sustainable economic development and social progress in Africa to reduce poverty. Survivors tend to earn less income and pay higher costs for health services. The global cost, for example, of violence against women was estimated by the UN to be some $1.5 trillion US. Now that's equivalent to approximately 2% of global GDP, or roughly the entire size of the Canadian economy in 2016. A little bit closer to home, in sub-Saharan Africa, the IMF found in a recent study just last year that a 1% increase in violence against women and girls reduced the economic activities by up to 8%. So this is not only an ethical issue or a human rights issue, there's also a very strong economic development argument to be made here as well. And addressing SEAH and bank finance projects is therefore vital to the success of our finance projects and to the reputation of AFDB. I also want to recognize that multilateral development banks and the projects that we support, while they're vitally important to increasing the wealth and opportunities that communities have access to, often by their very nature increase the risk of SEAH. Projects take place in areas affected by poverty. It's part of what we do. And those involved in implementing the projects, including management staff, laborers, manual workers, often work in close proximity to women, boys, girls, and other at-risk populations. I saw another statistic there the other day talking about, in particular, disabled populations, which have a greater opportunity of SEAH as well. I think 2 out of every 4. So we therefore have a duty of care to safeguard these populations and ensure that we are protecting them from harm. And that's why, through the launch of this advisory note and by convening discussions such as those today, the IRM hopes that we can make a small but positive contribution to this issue by helping to improve our collective response to prevent, mitigate, and respond to SEAH in bank finance projects. As we've said, this is a very difficult issue to address, and none of us have all the answers. But today, we've assembled a group of eminent experts, and I'm pretty sure they have some. Starting with Danielle Cornish-Spencer from the consultancy STD Direct, who will introduce the key recommendations made within the IRM's advisory note to the AFDB. She'll be followed by Daniela Greco from the World Bank. I don't know if I have the pronunciation there, Daniela Greco. It's my best Italian, who will talk through the work that the World Bank is going to, they've done to address SEAH within its sovereign operations. Andrea Cullinan from the IFC will discuss the work the IFC is doing to support its private sector borrowers to address SEAH. And finally, we're very pleased to have Oge Chukwadozi from the Safeguards Resource and Support Hub, who will present on the progress she's seen from a civil society in Africa in addressing SEAH over recent years, and what that tells us about the readiness of African civil society to support the bank's implementation of some of the recommendations that have been included in the advisory note. So at the end of the presentations, we'll take some questions from the audience. So, and again, I encourage you to put those in the Q&A and in the chat. But for now, let me hand over the floor to Danielle Cornish-Spencer. Danielle is head of portfolio for equal education at STD Direct and was a key contributor and author for the advisory note. Danielle brings over 15 years of experience in gender-related issues, including gender-based violence. And she also has direct experience of setting up safeguarding systems, policies, and procedures at the local level, the national level, regional, and global levels as well. So with that, I want to send it over to you, Danielle, for your contributions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. Just to ask that the presentation is shared on screen.
Yeah, the presentation is being shared.
Okay, thank you very much. So thanks, David, for the introduction. I'm mentioning some of the most crucial aspects of why addressing SEAH within bank operations is vital. I have to say it was a pleasure to work with the IRM to develop this advisory note, as well as with the colleagues from AFDB itself. And SD directors, I'm sure you all do have a great ambition to see the advice within this paper implemented within AFDB, as well as potentially by other DFIs. So today I'm going to explore the most salient points of the advisory note with you all. If you can go to slide number 2, Fred, thank you very much. If you could go back one. Thank you. Okay, so just in terms of the methodology, a kind of brief overview of that. We worked together as a team. There were a number of us from SD Direct working to develop a benchmarking framework across 4 key assessment categories: policies and concepts, project design and due diligence, response monitoring, contracts and implementation, and internal attention and leadership. And we'll do a deeper dive into those shortly. We then conducted a desk review of similar entities against these categories, using open access information to create a sectoral benchmark based on industry best practice and indicators. We then conducted key informant interviews, focus groups, and a document review of AFDB's current policies, practices, and procedures relating to SEAH within its resource streams. This then led to the development of the overall advisory note, and we also should mention that each activity along that path was guided by a steering committee comprised of IRM representatives, as well as bank employees from the procurement, safeguards, gender and civil society engagement teams. The steering committee provided insight into the inner workings of the bank, direction for the research, and supported in the verification of the scoring exercise. If you can go to the next slide, please. Next slide.
Yes, moving to the next slide. Apparently, yeah.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No problem, Fred. So the first of the four broad assessment categories I just mentioned is policies and definitions. So for each of these categories, we had 5 different risk levels that we had categorized the AFDB as low risk, moderate, major, substantial, and severe. As you can see here, the bank scored a major risk category for this theme. And this was actually the lowest risk score awarded across the 4 broad assessment categories. However, already in place, the bank already had significant work in place in terms of its policy. So SEAH being defined in the presidential directive, there was language around its application of that definition and conduct expected of bank staff, as well as extending that expectation to PIUs and to contractors. However, when we did explore that, the focus groups and interviews revealed a lack of clarity regarding the scope of the presidential directive. And so we felt that there should be more done to expand the definition and to kind of operationalize that and build knowledge about it within the bank. There was also definitions within corporate procurement department's code of conduct for suppliers, within the standard bidding documents, etc. as well. And it should be also noted that the bank has a zero tolerance policy to SEAH within documents where SEAH has actually been implemented. In terms of recommendations, again, that harmonisation and strengthening of the code of conduct, in particular to expand into areas or to define prohibited behaviours, particularly kind of loophole areas or behaviours that might sometimes fly under the radar on code of conducts, providing guidance, tools, financial and human resources to implement policy requirements, disseminating new policy provisions and tools, and really concretizing and exploring a kind of cascading approach to guidance and support to borrowers and contractors to ensure implementation is appropriate as well as supported. Next slide.
Yeah, moving to the next slide. It's a little bit slow from my scanning.
So we're moving into project design and due diligence on the next slide, and I'm sure Fred will bring that up. In terms of project design and due diligence, we assessed the risk of being severe. We wanted to see clear guidelines and tools to address SEAH risks, that there would be minimum standards in place for PIUs, that guidance on how to conduct safe stakeholder engagement activities would be in place, and assessments, self-assessments of PIUs and borrowers would be there, including the guidance and real detail. We also wanted to see clear language around the discontinuation of contracts and conditions for disqualification of PIUs and contractors where there wasn't adherence, or where there had been continued breaches, for example. Fred, are you able to
I would suggest Rose can. I'm having difficulties showing it from my computers. Maybe Rose will take over.
Thank you.
Yeah. So kindly bear with us as we
It's okay.
showing the
Thank you.
presentation from another computer.
Great. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. That's fantastic. So AFDB does have things in place regarding project design and due diligence. Social and environmental safeguards, for example, their assessments are undertaken for all projects and integrated into the ISS. And there is integration of SEAH within that work. There's also great work by gender specialists at the bank, working closely with environmental and social safeguard specialists in integrating measures to identify, mitigate and respond to SEAH within projects. However, in terms of our recommendation, we again want to see the depth coming through on project design and due diligence. So looking at a compulsory SEAH risk rating for all projects, and therefore that leading on to a proportionate approach to due diligence, to oversight, to monitoring, amending the ISS to include SEAH risks, having assessment tools differentiated by risk level. So again, that kind of different proportionate approach taken according to risk. Putting in place minimum standards. There are some kind of approaches in place in terms of having a code of conduct, which includes SEAH being a minimum standard, but actually drawing that out a little bit more, providing more depth on that. Making sure service mapping is in place as well, and that is quality assessed, particularly for higher risk projects. Looking at guidance on how to engage specific at-risk groups in exploring SEAH risk in order to mitigate that during the design phase. And then guidance and capacity building on SEAH mitigation measures. If we can go to the next slide. So in terms of response, monitoring, contracts and implementation, we scored the bank at being at a severe risk level. We wanted to see monitoring guidance in place, specifically on response and monitoring of contracts, looking at due diligence and whether that had been applied, following up on case reports and guidance and kind of standard operating procedures on that, advice on integrating SEAH through the project cycle, ensuring clauses were included in contracts and partner expectations and reporting arrangements in contracts being in place as well. Next slide. There was a clear need for further work with regards to response, monitoring, contracts and implementation, in particular in mandating regular monitoring of SEAH mitigation measures in the ESMP by AFDB staff or consultants, and particularly having SEAH expertise or training in place as well to be able to deliver that. Again, developing SOPs, tools, resources as well. Resourcing periodic implementation reports, ensuring environmental and social annual audit. It would cover SEAH risks and mitigation, and having monitoring guidance in place and documented as well. Next slide. On case handling, survivor support and reporting mechanisms and additional reporting mechanisms, this was a severe risk. And in my personal view, it is the area that should be prioritised So we should be seeing clear guidance in place in establishing and or adapting GRMs specific to SEAH, having separate reporting mechanisms in place on SEAH, given the specific needs of survivors for reporting, including needing a response within at least 72 hours for life-saving reasons, reporting mechanisms allowing anonymous complaints. We wanted to see PIUs, borrowers and contractors required to promote reporting mechanisms, clear guidance in place on case handling, and survivor-centered case handling, investigation standards, whistleblowing guidelines, and complaints mechanisms set up. We wanted, next slide, in total, in sum, to see really the different roles and responsibilities taken up and clarified in the way that you can see on the screen, so that the survivor was sure where they could go to report, and that the contractor, borrower, bank and the IRM were all clear about their responsibilities with regards to due diligence, access to grievance mechanisms, making sure that there's a monitored access to survivor support, and making sure that due diligence was there. There's also a need for oversight and an understanding of how that oversight would work, not only in terms of cases, but also in terms of due diligence. Next slide. In terms of internal attention and leadership, again, this was marked as severe risk. We would want to see register of safeguarding its SEAH issues raised, making sure that SEAH is standing agenda on board meetings. Dedicated staff members working to address SEAH and clear roles and responsibilities. Next slide. And our recommendations are to establish a permanent SEAH focal point, the leadership level, having those specific skills at different levels of the organisation are crucial to the implementation of SEAH work within the operations side of things. Establishing a roster of regional and country-based SEAH experts is also vital, and ensuring regular reporting on prevention and response to SEAH comes to the board as well. Thank you very much. That was a very quick overview of the recommendations that are contained within the report. Thanks very much.
I think that was an excellent summary, Danielle, and you handled yourself well with our technical difficulties as well. So let me apologize. So I think obviously, as you put in the report, this report is now live. It's available for download, and so and I'm sure we'll have a number of questions for you in the Q&A session. That was a report. So now let us turn to our esteemed group of experts to learn more about their thoughts and their experiences on preventing, mitigating, and responding to SEAH in operations specifically, because that's what you're also doing in many of the cases. I'm going to start with Daniela Greco. Daniela is a senior social development specialist and focal point, we just heard that word earlier, focal point on GBV in the operations, standards, environment, and social team at the World Bank. I wonder, Daniela, if you can tell us more about your work at the World Bank and specifically what you and your colleagues are doing to address SEAH within sovereign operations. As you know, sovereign operations, of course, dealing directly with governments in these areas.
Thanks, David. And let me see if I can overcome a little bit the technical challenges and try to share my presentation. Otherwise, I'm happy to go without. And I'm very delighted to be here and share a little bit of our journey as a World Bank. Just give me a quick sec. Can you confirm just that you can see my presentation? Yes, you're good. All right. So yeah, I really wanted to share a little bit the World Bank journey to this. it has been a journey that started really from recognizing GBV as a development challenge, and then went through really digging into the specific of sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment. But how did we get here? As some of you might know, the history of this, the bank came to, and in a way was confronted with the reality of sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment at the systematic scale on projects through the 2015 inspection panel case and on the Uganda sector project that saw significant and systematic allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse by project workers that were building a road against women and underage girls in communities. This was kind of what forced really the institution to open our eyes, and the then president appointed a GBV task force of really key actors working on these matters at that point in several different sectors to advise us on what to do about that. And the task force released an action plan that has been really what guided the World Bank work since the very beginning. This action plan came also at a time where the bank was releasing its new environmental and social framework. So there was also a lot of internal debate and engagement with clients on what will this new environmental and social framework look like, what additional flexibility is going to give, but also what are going to be, some of its, increased attention, and how will this feed into a model of sustainable development, essentially. So this kind of two things came together and led, in the meantime, also not noted here, there was a second inspection panel cases in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, also on a transfer project that had different allegations, but also included allegation of sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment of workers in communities. So the bank worked to respond to these inspection panel cases and really use this two project to really try to put in place significant mitigation measures and really try to for the first time to operationalize it. And some of this learning is, along with some of the critical advice from the task force, resulted in 2018 to the release of our first key document, the good practice note that was guiding infrastructure projects. In this good practice note, things were very oriented into the management of obligation on SEAH in contracts and through procurement for works. At doing this work, we also noted very early on that when we were really putting focus and attention in creating enabling environment, cases were coming forward. And so the bank has worked on an internal note on addressing some of the perhaps most sensitive parts of this work. That is, how do we receive and respond in a survivor-centered way to complaints related to sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment? What are some of the strategies to ensure that we are able to safely and ethically detect these cases? Where do women and girls or other groups at risk go when they have complaints of this kind? And also, what do we do once we receive them, essentially? This technical note was released in 2020. And at the same time, we also started looking a bit outwards and started really engaging with other bank and MFIs. And this led to a high-level meetings and to the creation of a working group since 2020, where AFDB is a key member, of course, Andrea with IFC, but really all MFIs engage in a kind of joint learning path and understanding that we need to tackle this together. The harmonization of requirements of sharing of good practices was really important. And the other stream of work that was really critical for us at the World Bank was the one on procurement. And in 2021, the bank launched perhaps its most path-breaking procurement work in this area, which is a disqualification mechanism, which is essentially a really an attempt to clarify for contractors that this has to be a new way of doing business. It has to be part of the way in which they manage their workers, they manage their engagement with communities. And this qualification mechanism essentially says that in high-risk projects, so in the most high-risk project, when contractors are found to be non-compliant, so not to be implementing their contractual requirements on SEAH, on training of workers, on signature of code of conduct, on supervision, they're disqualified to receiving any contracts by the World Bank for 2 years. So this is obviously a very new thing in the world of many private contractors, but we have been very grateful of sharing this journey on safeguard really with leadership, both from the transport sector early on, but also from the procurement colleagues. It has been really a collective work, a collegial work. And then the last really key document is that the Good Practice Note for Human Development that we reached just recently in 2022, recognizing that, we got to this looking at a civil work perspective, but in reality, risk of sexual exploitation and abuse are also inherent in many projects that deliver key services on education, health, and social protection and jobs. And also recognizing that this sector has incredible opportunities, not only to address project-related risks, but also to go beyond and prevent this risk of sexual exploitation and abuse, building the systems at the ministry level, but also to address more broadly GBV in a country, and so address the social norms that underpin and providing services for quality services for survivors. So what do we focus on? The first area of work that we really focus on was the risk assessment. How do we ensure that teams are able to screen essentially the most high-risk projects so that we can dedicate technical expertise to this project? And then how do we ensure that as part of the standard one under the ESF, which is the one that really engage client in assessing project-related associated risk and mitigate them, SEAH is taken into account. So what are the methodology? What is the right expertise to go assess these safely in communities? And then, as I was saying, we have this 2 good practice notes that go beyond and are able to make some key recommendations that basically link risk level to a set of core mitigation measures. Of course, these core mitigation measures are the same for everyone in all countries, in all contexts, etc. So we always say the mitigation measures that are in this good practice note should really be a minimum standard and should be adapted to the features, to the opportunities of each project. And perhaps before we get to this, the minimum mitigation measures are pretty much aligned with what Danielle was saying. So we have code of conduct and behavioral standards for all categories and of project workers. So starting from project implementation unit, contractors, consultants, etc. So the importance also that this trickles down. The recommendation is also to have a pathway for receiving complaints of SEA in grievance mechanism that are explicit, taught early on, include information sharing protocols, and include referral pathways. So GRM need to exist associated to a pathway to link survivors to care. First and foremost, this is really our key priority. There are, of course, other important considerations, but our first question is always, has the survivor been linked to quality, available local services? Then some other key mitigations are really on awareness, on training of workers, but also on mobilization of the right GBV expertise, recognizing that this work, while really fitting under the ESF and our work on social risk management, also requires specific technical expertise to be really grounded in good practices. The second part is capacity of clients and staff. So we have done extensive training both internally and externally. Then we have focused on incident response. So when we have cases coming forward, recognizing that there is no zero risk, and actually when we put, as I was saying, when we put in place enabling mechanism, cases do come forward, what do we do? And so we have integrated we have internal escalation protocols for all severe cases, and we have made sure that those protocols integrate SEAH risks. We have a growing caseload, and so we have been doing lots of awareness raising and management of expectations internally with our board, with everybody, saying seeing cases is actually a positive thing because we know that gender-based violence exists and is underreported. So the tip of the iceberg that we are seeing case forward is a good sign that we are starting really putting in place enabling mechanism, and we are being able to connect survivors to care. We have also, frankly, provided a lot of hands-on technical support on what incident response looks like, on what a survivor-centered mechanism, what a survivor-centered approach is. And then we have really worked with our internal grievance redress services on what do we do when cases of SEAH reach the GRS. In terms of operational processes, I already discussed about this. The SEAH agenda is really integrated in all the standards, in most of the standards of the ESF, but the how to implement it specifically is guided by the 2 good practice note. Emphasis on procurement, especially early on. We have reviewed our standard bidding documents to ensure that they integrate the minimum mitigation measure for contractor, and also we have put in place this qualification mechanism that was mentioning earlier. And then the last priority of work, we have really engaged in a lot of internal and external outreach with the MFI coordination groups, both at high level as well as technical level, where we engage more on good practices. In terms of external coordination, so we join several coordination mechanisms, both in regions as well as globally. And then we have kind of walked the talk, and we have led an internal HR, actually, so under a completely different accountability, but HR has led a 3-year action plan on sexual harassment that has included several measures, including the appointment of a sexual harassment coordinator, training and revised code of ethics, mandatory training and revised code of ethics for all staff, and also some transparency. So we have published internally all the cases that were received by ethics and what was their outcomes, of course, in line with confidentiality principles. I just wanted to go quickly over a case study because I know that this seems a lot, but yet I just wanted to share that one attempt to this that we are currently putting in place is the DRC Emergency Education Project, 4-year project, a massive investment for the bank, $800 million in results-based financing, mainly focusing on governance reform. It is result-based financing, so disbursement is linked to indicators, and quite critically, some SEAH mitigation actions have been linked to disbursement indicators. And I'm also happy to share that these are some of the disbursement indicators on which the project has been able to disburse more smoothly. So contrary to what was at least at the beginning a bit the hesitation, this has worked that the Ministry of Education has really moved forward and has been able to achieve what they were hoping to achieve, essentially. The project is massive, it's in 10 DRC provinces. I'm not going to explain to you what that scale looks like. You're talking about 200,000 students and 2.3 million additional teachers, 10 million students, and over 2 million additional students enroll. The risk of sexual exploitation and abuse were considered high because of the history of we were, very alerted to this because of the history of the bank in the DRC and inspection panel case, but also because of what we know are contextual risk in the DRC and what was, and the basic data that was pointing to clear data, both in terms of engagement and consultations, but also of more systematic studies that were pointing out to the fact that, teachers were part of the problem, and violence perpetrated by teachers was part of the problem. So the project put in place a comprehensive approach to address SEA and a phase approach. So what did it look like? At the beginning, we the project really worked on putting in place a contingency facility with a national hotline and a contract with UNFPA to be able to report cases and refer to emergency care. In a phase 2, we have really rolled out the ground components, and so a code of conduct signed by all primary school teachers. This was a massive endeavor by the Ministry of Education. It has also involved a lot of consultations with private schools that are actually, part of the public school systems. But it was a significant effort, but also successful effort, because it has been verified by the third party and allowed to disbursement of funds to the government. They put in place a complaint resolution channel in the ministry level grievance mechanism that they're working on. So not project, but more broadly ministry level. They have developed a mapping and developed a referral protocol, a more stable referral protocol. And they have also mobilized some funding to fill some gaps in service provision, because not in all regions where this project was implemented, at least a minimum basic service provision and psychosocial service provision, medical health provision was available. And then the last part that is really the one ongoing is that we have appointed school-based focal point. The government has appointed school-based focal point and is conducting community-level communication campaigns and is hiring a third-party monitor to help with the monitoring of all of this. I know I'm tight with time. I just wanted to share perhaps a couple of points that the discussion with the borrower on this has really been really positive, and the Ministry of Education has strengthened and recognized also an opportunity to strengthen through the SEAH work their accountability framework, their governance and citizen engagement. It has also expanded GBV services to areas that were not covered and allowed the Ministry of Education to connect a number of survivors, including very young children, to care in regions where otherwise they would have not had this access. It has prepared, quite critically, the rollout for mitigation measures to secondary education, where we knew that the risks were in a way even higher. And so perhaps laying the ground in primary education has really prepared to get them into secondary education project where the work is currently ongoing, and has also laid the ground for understanding and acknowledging that we needed to go beyond and to really address, to really be able to keep girls in school and to be able to keep girls in school safely. Risk mitigation was not sufficient. And the Ministry of Education had an excellent entry point to actually implement some whole school approaches to address social norms. And so this is what we are currently designing with the government and preparing for the secondary education projects. And I just want to say that also, when we do good SEAH risk mitigation, sometimes these approaches to address social norms are challenging to bring to scale, but are not that costly. And so it was really, because we had so well paved the ground on all the ethical things, the building blocks that needed to be done before, this was in a way an easy step to do. I just want to finish by saying that there are also some challenges. We have seen a significantly growing caseload, and this is not easy to manage. For this project, for us, it's again, we see that it's a good sign, but it's also not easy to manage, especially because Respond relies heavily on many sectors, including health, child protection, social protection. And so the Ministry of Education cannot handle this by themselves. It really needs to be both from the government side and from the bank side, a holistic approach to this. There has been really the role of, I can't stress enough, the role of civil society organizations. The government needed to rely, they were really eager and strategic in building their own systems. They also needed to rely on the collaboration of civil society organization to ground some of these approaches at the community level. And then the final perhaps message that, it showed us that while this work takes time and takes resources, and resources need to be taken into account, it is possible and has actually hugely helped a project become a better project and deliver better development overall. So on this note, I will stop at this, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the other conversation, but also happy to take any questions later on. I hope this kind of provided a flavor. Of course, the work that we have done, the work that we have ahead is still huge.
That was more than a flavor. Thank you very much, Daniela. I mean, and I very much appreciated the case study. And of course, you know, when one thinks about the journey that the World Bank has been on since, you know, 2015, 2016, one of the most recent, you know, the frequent words that one hears is the word revolutionary, in terms of that this has been a revolution within the institution itself. So you've absolutely been a part of that. I'd now like to bring in for a bit of a different perspective, but in a similar kind of vein, Andrea Cullinan. And Andrea, you're the lead for, I'll let you kind of put up your slides at the same time here. You're the lead for gender and gender-based violence in the IFC's Environment, Social and Governance Solutions Department. You've published several publications and book on this topic, and you've also been active in developing tools and guidance on SEAH, as we've just seen. Some of those things are so important, as well as the training as well. So we've just heard about some of the efforts in the sovereign operations. So what about with IFC clients? What sort of things is the IFC doing to support its private sector borrowers to address CN projects? Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, David. And also congratulations to the IRM for putting out this advisory note. I've read it. It's clearly in line with all our work. And I'm a little jealous of AFDB, I must say, because you've been able to learn the lessons that, or actually take advantage of the lessons that we've all learnt the hard way, I think, in the field over this time. I think David was being way too modest when he introduced the advisory note and said that IRM are hoping to do their little bit. I think it's a really substantial bit, so a very significant way forward. Okay, so what are we doing in the private sector about this? I'm trying to move my slide forward. Oh, there we are. I'll try and make up a little bit of time, because we really want to hear from all of you, the participants, and we really want to hear your questions. Please keep posting them in the chat. And we'll have some discussion afterwards. I just really want to give you some quick highlights of what we do in the private sector. I'll talk a little bit about our philosophy, but I want to be honest with you about some of the challenges we've had, and also looking at some of the results. So, you know, we are on a journey with this. We aren't there yet. We've got quite a heavy lift in front of us to bring the whole private sector on board with this issue, but we are making some strides in this regard. In terms of how IFC approaches working with the private sector on the issue of SEAH, I mean, we do it largely through our environmentals or our sustainability framework. Our IFC performance standards are applicable and so forth. So we really leverage that. That in itself has been one of our most important lessons. If we've been able to leverage our performance standards, which apply to all our investments, all our clients and companies, which have a large gender component, but, you know, largely gender-related risks, then we're actually able to write that into our agreements with clients and our investments and use that as some leverage. Now, we want to go beyond that. I mean, that's just the starting point, but that's been really quite a way to incentivize our clients. Now, with that, we know that we assess the whole range of gender-related risks, gender equality. We assess non-discrimination, equal opportunities, community health and safety risks. All of this is normal practice as part of due diligence work, if you like, under ESG. But we also have recognized that gender-based violence, and in this context, sexual exploitation and abuse, is actually the highest gender-related risk of them all. Hence, we have prioritized our work on that and focused on that. Just very quickly, how are we doing this operationally? Well, we do a lot of in-depth assessments of SEAH risks across our investments. Actually, all our investments, except maybe low risk ones, all of our investments get screened. We have a diagnostic tool for gender and gender-based violence that we apply to each project. Out of that, anything comes out as medium or high risk using our diagnostic material and tools, then we might do an in-country or an on-site SEA risk assessment, a deep dive assessment. And we've done that in many countries in Africa. And we continue to have that as very much on our agenda. So again, we then help our clients, or help clients being for us the companies that we invest in, just to say that, not individuals of services, but our companies that we support. Then we help them design ways to mitigate the risks of SEA, and that can be a variety of things. And Danielle also, Danielle in the beginning with the advisory note covered some of that territory in terms of what might be done to mitigate risk at a medium or a high level. We follow that philosophy and principles. We essentially looking from our perspective in the private sector, we focus a lot on labour conditions. It's very interesting, and a number of projects in Africa at the moment. I'm working a lot with agribusiness, for example, as a major sector of our work in Africa, but also it tends to also come with a lot of SEA risk, right? So we are looking at SEA across the supply chains. Of course, we look at other risks like child labour, the very big risks in supply chains in agribusiness, but that also goes hand in hand with SEA risk. So this is an interesting area for me at the moment, that we're really engaging much more with companies, and we're trying to get the private sector who are involved in, say, the cacao industry, West Africa, cotton industry, also West Africa, a little Sahel, these sorts of big agri business. I'm using this sector of agri just as an example, but it goes across all sectors, believe me. But we're looking at those, what we already know to be high risk sectors like agri, and high risk commodities like cacao, and cotton. We're looking at now how we can actually address SEA specifically to those sectors. So we're talking with governments that might have national action plans on this. We're talking with our civil society counterparts or stakeholders. And I really want to give a shout out to civil society organisations, anyone who's on this webinar. Thank you also for all your hard work. I mean, you know, this is civil society organisations, especially service providers around gender-based violence, are really the people that we hold in deep respect, and we've also learned a lot of the lessons. So you've taught us a lot that we need to take on board about survivor-centered approach. And of course, this is now in the advisory note. And again, you know, I really reinforce that message. Survivor-centered approach in the advisory note from IFTB is excellent. We adhere to that. So coming back to operational delivery, we also have been building up our evidence about what works. You know, we're not there yet. We're not 100% sure of what works across sectors, but we are building our evidence base. So we are developing a number of case studies. I'm going to put a link later on in the chat that gives all our publications, etc. And that will be, you know, it also includes those case studies. Okay, so some of the challenges and lessons, and then lastly, I'll move on to the conclusions from this. So we have learned that ad hoc inputs rarely move the needle, really need a holistic approach, okay? We don't want this to be a ticking the box exercise. We don't want to just see companies so have a code of conduct, have a, you know, maybe human resource policies, etc., and then it sits on the shelf. No, we want to see implementation. It's got to be more than ticking the boxes. It's got to have training. Okay. We also well, IFC has produced, and the World Bank more broadly has produced a lot of knowledge, tools and guidance. I know, you know, we have written about 52 knowledge products in the last few years. There's been a big increase. These are essential. They really help. We get a lot of great feedback from companies on this, but they cannot stand alone. Nearly always we say, well, can you help us implement this? Can you come and train us on this? So it's good, but everyone needs training, technical advice to actually implement it. We're not there yet. We know, we've learned SEA challenges are really common. They're found across all sectors. I mentioned agri a minute ago, just to highlight an example, but it's all sectors. I'm often asked internally in IFC, well, can you just tell us which sectors we need to concentrate on? Which ones are the higher risk? Which ones? It's so difficult because for us, it becomes company specific. It's what the nature of that operation is. What are they doing? Is it a high, is it a new construction of something? There's a major influx of workers into villages. You know, is there going to be now a disruption of power dynamics in the local villages because people with a lot of money, may cashed up workers come in? All those sorts of things, project specific. We know that one of the lessons we've learned is systematically addressing SEA risks is actually often done fairly superficially. Again, few policies, few mechanisms sitting on the shelf, not implemented, not really a lot of stakeholder engagement with the affected community, not necessarily engagement with the local NGOs, civil or women's organizations who can really inform. So we're trying our best to keep promoting, you know, it has to go beyond being superficial. It really has to have a deep and meaningful, you know, work to this level. Another challenge is, frankly, SEAH, talking about sexual exploitation, abuse, taboo topic, many areas, okay? Even for us, we find our own staff uncomfortable talking about it, let alone clients in different cultural contexts. So it's hard, but we don't shy away from it. It's there, it's a real issue, so we have to talk about it, but it's sensitive and difficult. Some of the interesting sort of emerging areas is, you know, there's a clear evidence link between SEA risks and environmental issues like climate change that I think we're all working on much more these days. And so whenever we're thinking of projects that are relating to natural resource management, and this comes a lot in private sector because we deal a lot with natural resource companies, we always now have to have an SEA lens to that work. Again, I'm highlighting the message of the importance of working with NGOs. They're not just people to refer to, they actually are our active and equal partner. So having a good balance of power with them. Some of the results, I'm not going to read this, by the way, I'm just highlighting. We have realized that SEA is actually a ubiquitous material risk to the outcome of all our sustainability efforts. It's a high risk, must be managed, and unless we do, not going to be sustainable. That's it. We know that addressing SEA leads directly to development impact, and we're development finance institutions, so we're interested in the development of a country. That's for sure. So that's our bottom line. We know if we address these issues, we have a higher development impact. We know that there's also growing demand. I know it comes across my desk every day, really, from private sector. Can you help with this? Give us more information, more training, guidance, etc. So this is fantastic because it just is a tangible way to see that there's not only a need, but there's an interest in this area. So as a result, we keep, you know, we've invested more in having a response to needs. Just a few key takeaways then, lastly. Our role as DFIs more broadly, including the African Development Bank, and IFC as well, you know, we're risk takers, okay, and we're development organizations. So we, you know, if we include SEA as part of our social outcomes, then this really has an impact on development. If we also address all the systemic barriers to integrating an SEA lens, well then, you know, we can actually influence other actors in the financial system to follow our lead. So we can actually be role models in this regard with this work. So I think, again, congratulations to IRM on leading this, because this is actually role modeling how accountability mechanisms can also, you know, play a significant contribution to this. So thank you.
And thank you for that, Andrea. I mean, and from all of our speakers so far, it's been such a deeply enriching discussion. So we'll want to rush to some of the Q&As, but not before, however, we stop in and just to underline one of the points that you made, Andrea, was the importance of civil society. And so we have with us Oge Chukwadozie. Oge is the Global Safeguarding Advisor with the Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub, a fabulous resource, by the way, for anyone online. They're an international humanitarian and development organization that works to strengthen safeguarding policies and practices against SEAH, working largely with a number of CSOs that Andrew was just talking about. So, Oge, I'm going to turn to you now. And perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about your organization and the kind of work you're doing to support organizations and communities addressing elevated SEAH risks that might accompany bank-financed projects in those communities. So over to you, Oge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, so I'll be talking about the experiences RSH has actually gained over the past 2 years in working with civil society organizations. So RSH, Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub, it's an international program that is developed to actually support organizations implementing programs in both humanitarian and development sectors to strengthen their safeguarding systems and practice against SEAH. And it's a UK aid-funded program and global multilingual platform. So yeah, if you go online, you will get us on Safeguarding Support Hub. You will see our library. We have a huge resource library with hundreds and hundreds of resources, both written documents, how-to notes, webinars, and all on different aspects of safeguarding and prevention of SEAH. And we have e-learning modules and different resources to actually help CSOs. And in Africa, we are implementing in Ethiopia, Nigeria, and South Sudan. The Ethiopian hub just marks the end of phase for that, but we are still on Nigeria and South Sudan till next year, 2023. Now, in terms of the progress that we've recorded with CSOs over the past 2 years, we've been working with CSOs in African hub. We've have really identified increased awareness on what safeguarding and SEAH actually means. For the hubs, before the commencement of activities, we have what we call the country assessment, basically to understand what CSOs know about safeguarding, understand the safeguarding landscape, and understand who is doing what, who are the actors, and what really are they doing in terms of safeguarding or SEAH. And then, from that country assessment, we found out very interesting things. So first, the awareness of safeguarding and SEAH is actually quite limited when it comes to smaller civil society organizations that haven't partnered with INGOs or UN bodies or such big organizations. So for the small organizations, they really have very limited understanding of what SEAH is. There is actually a lot of confusion around safeguarding and SEAH and GBV that happen at community level. Then we also found out that, yes, for those who are aware, like for Nigeria, for example, specifically talking about Nigeria, we identified that organizations who are implementing humanitarian program in the northeast part of Nigeria, where we have the humanitarian crisis, actually has higher knowledge about safeguarding and SEAH than other organizations who are implementing development programs in other parts of Nigeria. We know that Nigeria is a very vast country, so there are like different dynamics here and there. And then, but again, for even those that understand safeguarding and SEAH, it's quite limited. So there is actually focus on developing policy, which is actually, yes, the very first step. But again, you know, after policy, you know, so for some organizations that we've partnered with, you know, like they say, oh, we actually have safeguarding policy, but we didn't know what next to do. So after the policy is just like, okay, yeah, we are done with that. You know, we have the policy and that's it. Or maybe at most they have some, you know, reporting mechanisms that maybe hasn't received any form of response in the past 6 months or 1 year, and you know, everything is okay, everything is fine. So with our program, you know, we continue to sensitize and raise awareness through our trainings, through access to diverse resources we have, and our e-learning module. Now, another thing now that we worked on is to really improve the capacity of CSOs. So RSH, we have this 6 to 7 months mentorship program that some organizations, you know, participate in Nigeria, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. We have over 90 organizations that have been part of our mentorship program. So basically, these organizations are being handheld and being taken through step by step on how to improve safeguarding systems. So basically, it starts with an organizational capacity assessment. And then, you know, they now identify the gaps and develop their action plan. And with the support of a mentor who is working with RSH, you know, this mentor now takes the organization through specific things, you know, to really strengthen that system of safeguarding. And the areas of capacity development, you know, have include like safe programming. So how really do you make sure that your program is not causing further harm to the community, to the program participants? How do you ensure that you have safer recruitment where you're not getting in the wrong people into the organization? At least try to do what you can. You know, how do you make sure that your communications are not exposing people to further harm? Safeguarding, organizational safeguarding culture is yet another program that we are doing with some of our organizations, partners, to really have the organization as a safe space where, you know, everybody, irrespective of gender, irrespective of age, irrespective of religion, affiliation, or whatever, you know, diversity, really, you know, the organization will be safe for everyone to air their views and feel included. So with building the organizational safeguarding culture, which promotes all to have a safe space and to be able to air their views, then it will now translate that, you know, these staff, these volunteers, you know, these consultants working in this organization will be able to, you know, take on this safety they've experienced in the organization to the community and not cause harm in the community, because, you know, you cannot give what you don't have. If the organization is not considered safe for them, then there's no way they're going to go to the community to be able to openly discuss and ensure that how they pass information is not causing further harm. And again, on the other hand, you know, it's also a support that when there are causes of alarm, when there are like issues of safeguarding breach, then, you know, staff will feel better equipped to report because they know that, yes, their voices count. And then, of course, as part of responding, we have reports and report handling and investigations as part of the response to really strengthen organizations. So taking on the survivor-centered approach, we've done some programs. Ethiopia did develop some resources and are working to really support this survivor-centered approach. Then another thing that we are doing for RSH is really fostering continuous dialogue. So for civil society organizations, primarily RSH is really about civil society organizations. So for civil society organizations, really having that space where they can share and learn. But we're also like seeing increased interest in other actors, like more INGOs are interested. We are having government agencies, we are having private sectors actually, come in, I want to know more about safeguarding and what they can do. In Nigerian Hub, for example, they are working with ACP, that's At-Risk Children Program, which is actually a federal government initiative of the social protection to really strengthen and support at-risk children. And RSH Nigerian Hub was approached to help this program develop their safeguarding policy, and then to also train the youth facilitators that will be going out to reach out to the at-risk children. So, these interests, show that yes, there's actually more interest from other actors in terms of improving the safeguarding and PSEAH practices. And
okay.
we have
okay, I wonder if we can just, I'm going to take a cue from your title there, Fostering Continuous Dialogue, because I want to offer this open to the community, because I think there's lots of questions I'm seeing out there as well, and we'll be sure to make you as the first person who can answer some of those. But I wonder if we can maybe wrap up if there's any particular point, or else we can move right into our Q&A, if that's okay.
Yes, sure, that's fine. So yeah, the organizations through the mentorship program, like you see them reaching out. So that appetite is there to actually learn more and improve and share the knowledge about safeguarding and PSEAH. So we have challenges, which is also a bit similar to what has been shared by other panelists. But in terms of lessons learned, if I just focus on that, funding is essential for safeguarding, so that, CSOs can put in place the identified mitigation measures that have been identified during risk assessments. And then CSOs need more than just one-off training. So lots of times funders, partners, just want to have just one-off training or have a clause of safeguarding on their MOU. That is not enough. There is really needed support for safeguarding. And then organizations need to build trust to be able to have the reporting mechanisms work. It doesn't just work that, yes, you have reporting mechanisms and there's no reports. Yes, you need to constantly engage with the community. And then effective safeguarding needs a whole organizational approach, from leadership to HR, human resources programs, monitoring, evaluation, and learning logistics. The last panelist talked about procurement and all. So it's important that, everybody involved in an organization understands what their role is when it comes to safeguarding. All right, so yeah, that's our website, and sign on to our newsletter and follow us on social media for more information on safeguarding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, that was fabulous. And again, just to ensure everyone, we will be sharing all the presentations from the speakers, so you'll have an opportunity to kind of dig down a little bit at that. And I would again encourage you to look at the Resource and Support Hub for some of the materials that they have. I'm now going to just turn it over to Anna, who, I've watched some of the questions going to be buzzing over, but I know that colleague Anna Gahn from SED Direct has been recording some of the questions that we've received from the audience. And I wonder, Anna, if you might join us and direct some of those to our panelists. And we'll try, and I can ask both the questioners and the panelists to be as succinct as possible so that we can get as many people heard.
Yeah, thank you. We've also been trying to answer questions as we go along. So the question that I'm reading right now came up, Daniela, as you were speaking, and it's referring to the whole school approach and talking about addressing social norms. So the question is asking basically IFIs, the World Bank addresses risks that are associated with their projects only, and often not the underlying or the root causes of gender-based violence or SEAH in the communities. How do you connect, or do you connect the root causes there in your work, in your school approach? And if you could talk to those connections a little bit, that would be great. Over to Daniela, and then maybe on to Andrew if you also have a point on that.
Sure. I mean, this is a broad discussion. I will try to be as short as possible, essentially. The good practice note and the guidance that we have been talking about is specific to the risk mitigation of project-associated risk at the project level. However, the bank has always recognized, both because this agenda in a way stemmed from the gender strategy at the bank and the recognition of GBV as one of the key impediments and of all sectors as having a role to play in preventing and responding to GBV, but also because of the nature of SEAH. The bank has always recognized that SEAH happens in a continuum. And so while we have some key mitigation measures that are really intended to mitigate project-associated risks, we also recognize that to tackle this in a more systematic manner, to prevent risks, there needs to be both work at the system level, so within country system, within ministry, to really integrate policies on accountability, on code of conduct, but also you need to address the social norms that underpin the discrimination against women and girls and against some other vulnerable groups that essentially allows and make so that workers, like anybody else in a society, feels entitled to exercise their power, to misuse their power against women, girls, and other groups targeted by SEAH. And so this is what I intended when we see that, you know, to be able to go to really prevent cases from happening, then we need to escalate the work beyond the project-specific work and build both country system and address root causes. I don't know if this answer, of course, the conversation is much longer than that, but just to be brief. And this has been a constant tension. And perhaps the last point on this is that the good practice note recognizes that actually provides guidance on addressing SEAH and SEAH as the most typically associated forms of GBV that is associated to development and humanitarian action. However, the good practice note also recognizes that other forms of GBV can be associated to project. And this doesn't mean in any way that these risks should not be addressed as part of broader social risk, as social risk actually should. And the work on SEAH perhaps helps opening a space to address this also better and become more likely aware of these other risks. But it's just a choice because these are the most systematic one associated to project and the ones that projects can do most about, have most leverage about through accountability and things like that. I will stop it at that, David, back. Or,
great, yeah. Anna, do you want to continue on from there? But I also see there's a hand up from one of our interpreters.
I'll go for the second question. It's another question on why we don't have an ESS 11, which is, for those unfamiliar with this acronym, an environmental and social standards, kind of a standard for SEAH. I assume that also goes to you, Daniela, but Andrea, you may also want to respond to that.
I think because creating a separate process for SEAH did not seem to make sense. The ESF is already a huge endeavor and actually provides the perfect guidance and kind of policy, underlying policy to address much of the work that needs to be done on SEAH. So the idea has been to create dedicated guidance because the how to differs, but the underpinning processes and policies and requirements essentially remain the same. And so instead of creating a separate standalone thing, it was really important for us to ensure that, you know, the risk assessment, the stakeholder engagement, the labor related condition, community health and safety, all of this took into account the work that needs to be done on SEAHs, and so that this really gets mainstream throughout all our safeguarding work, essentially.
Great.
Andrea,
Anna,
do you want to add something?
Anna, you have another question for us?
Yeah, there was one more. It was a question around safer recruitment, and I know Andrea was typing away, but I think for the audience it'd be really useful to hear how your organization goes about safer recruitment, and also then to Danielle how you brought that into the guidance that you developed. So I'll hand to Andrea and then over to Danielle on that one.
Unmuting. Okay. Yeah, I just typed a quick answer to that, just an example for everyone's reference about safer recruitment. From IFC, we have this covered in our performance standards. Well, actually, the guidance notes expands on this in more detail. But one quick example is of security personnel. A lot of private sector projects, especially say gas and mining projects, have to also hire security presence. So there's always, well, not always, but there quite often can be security guards, security presence of some form. So one of our performance standards around community health and safety, under which SEAH falls in for us largely in this PS, we actually have a section that talks about the safe recruitment of security personnel and with regards to protection of the community from harms, including SEAH. So to that end, what we would do, what we expect is that these people are properly screened for any past history of or any record of SEAH perpetration, and we also expect that security forces are well trained in this regard, that there's a suitable code of conduct, that there actually has to be, real principles applied. And we recognize this particular group, not highlighting them for any other reason other than this is just an example. Of course, we know SEAH, we want all staff and employees and contractors to abide by codes of conduct, but this example of security personnel, they have, a clear, one of those very obvious power differentials with the community, okay? And they're often at the gates, they often let people in, they, there's some known abuses that are potentially a risk with that. So that's an example. Thanks.
Thanks. And then over to you, Danielle, if you wanted to talk to that a bit as well.
Thanks so much. I think Andrea's example was great to hear. When we're looking at recruitment, I think one of the things that we need to bear in mind is that we've got contractors and subcontractors, et cetera, and we also need to have a basic in place, and guidance on how to deliver that. But on top of that, a proportionate approach. So when Andrea's kind of talking about security guards, I think it's a really good example. But you might want to also look at kind of education projects with high influx of workers from outside of the area, for example, and that pushing your kind of exploration and background checks to a higher priority for that particular project. I think in the note itself, what we talk about is the need for guidance. So the need for guidance to be put in place that would probably look like what Andrea was describing or what I've just described, but that needs to be documented and put in place so that contractors can put that into action, that borrowers can oversee that being put into action, and that AFDB can have that oversight as well. Oh, I also have one last point on that. I think it also feeds in to one of the things that I think I had picked up on as well. And I think we've been talking about civil society, but it's not just civil society. There's a whole piece of work that needs to be done on system strengthening. Background checks in certain contexts, for example, don't exist. And so kind of documenting ways around that. How do you do a background check where there isn't a criminal background check in place for police, and that can be through more informal mechanisms, doing follow-up with HR at previous employees, etc., but that needs to be documented and put in place. But then also on the other side of it, it might be a development project initiatives to strengthen systems and to fund GBV services in places where higher risk projects are being implemented too.
Well, that's fabulous, and you know, and some great questions there, and but I think we probably have to end it there for timing purposes. I think one of the takeaways that I'm taking from today, I mean, we often look at this obviously as a negative issue in terms of SEAH and some of the issues that we want to prevent it. But some of the issues or some of the tools that we're bringing to the table, and I think Andrea mentioned this, is that, you know, this is about having a higher developmental impacts. And I think that's a positive and you know, takeaway from this, is that we're trying to actually contribute more in terms of what the impact is going to be on in terms of the development that we're working towards. And that's a really positive you know, positive bit of information there. So with that, I want to thank our panelists, our hardworking interpreters. We've put you over time now. Well, 3 minutes, probably going to be to 5 minutes there. Our web technicians, and of course to all of you for your very precious time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us, and thank you for your engaging and challenging questions. We will be sharing a poll with you now, and we'd be ever so grateful if you could complete it, as it helps us to assess our own performance here and helps us to improve the events that we deliver. We'll also be sharing this webinar recording and a copy of the advisory note. I can say kind of fresh off the printing press, but I think it's more fresh off a digital printing press, and as well as any of the related resources by email. And I noticed there was a number of links continued in some of the presentations as well, and we'll do that just in the following days. So I want to thank you very much and hope to connect with you all again very soon, and have a very pleasant rest of your day. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So we're going to launch the very quickly the poll with the participants before wrapping up. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, big hand for all of our speakers and for our questioners and our interpreters and technicians. Thank you all.
You want us to sign off, David?
I think they're just waiting for this poll, but other than that, but I know you have other meetings to get to as well.
Yes,
So.
they've already launched the poll, so they.
Oh, it is up. Okay.
Yeah, it's already
fabulous.
Up.
It's up. It's up. The poll is up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your help with that. Great. And we look forward to engaging with you on this as an ongoing conversation. So thank you all again for that.
Congratulations to IRM.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.